Or 4, 3 would go. Probably 3. Okay. We're going to be on 110. We start. 110b. Tanu Rabbanan. Let me get a napkin for this. No, it's okay. I got it. It's all here. Perfect. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan.
I don't need these.
Okay. The rabbis taught. It's about 4 lines from the bottom on 110b. Hamenasich, someone that pours shleishus lugim mayim, 3 lug, which is a measurement. Maybe each lug is about 6 eggs worth. Is that how it works? A lug is 6 eggs worth. I think so. Of water. That would be like 18 egg size volume of water. Bachag, on sukkos bachutz. But instead of pouring it on the altar in the temple, he pours it outside the temple. So he's supposed to be pouring it in the temple. He pours it outside. So he's chayiv. He's guilty for pouring it outside the temple. Rabbi Lazar, I skipped Rabbi Lazar Bar Shimon. Rabbi Lazar says, Im malon l'shem chag, if the water was filled up in the vessel for the sake of the holiday, then he's chayiv. The Gemara asks, "B'may kamiflagi or my binayu?" With what are they arguing? There's two versions to the text here. It sounds like Rabbi Lazar is saying the same thing. He's saying that if it was filled up for the holiday, then good. And the sages, we don't know what they hold, but it's if he poured it on the holiday, so he's chayiv. Rabbi Lazar says no, and you need some intention here. And what's the difference? What would be the practical difference? Amar Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak b'yesh shir b'mayim kamiflagi. Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak says that do we need a specific amount of water or not? Now, according to the sages, even if you poured more than 3 lug, he would also be guilty, because the sages hold that more than 3 lug contains 3 lug, contains more, but there's also 3 lug there. Now, if you'll say that the vessel was too large, and the vessels in the temple needed to be exactly the size, so the sages hold that there is no limit upwards how much water there should be. There's only a minimal limit, not a maximum limit. So you can't say that the vessel was too large. And Rabbi Lazar says that no, just like the wine is supposed to be 3 lug, the water is supposed to be 3 lug. If you filled it up with a vessel that was too large, so then there is a measurement there is a maximum limit, and so therefore the water wouldn't have been sanctified when you put it in the vessel because it was too much. That's the machlekes according to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Papa Amar. Rav Papa has another interpretation. B'karvu nesachem b'midbar pligi. The difference between the sages and Rabbi Lazar has to do with what was going on in the desert. Because the verse says that when you will come into the land of your inheritance, and then you will have to give, with every sacrifice, you will have to give also libations. You'll have to pour wine. What was going on beforehand in the desert? Why does it say when you will come into the land? And in the desert, when they were bringing a sacrifice, they didn't pour. So there's 2 opinions. According to the sages, the 40 years that the Jewish people in the desert, they did bring the wine and the libations. So therefore, what does it mean when they came into the land they'll start to bring the libations. What that means is that they're going to have to bring the libations even on private altars. Because they were allowed to bring on private altars for the years that were in between the tabernacle and the temple. Or in the years that they were conquering the land, they had private altars. Now, once we've established that private altars also need libations, then we have a rule that private altars do not need utensils, do not need vessels that are holy. You can use just a regular vessel when you're using a private altar. Only in the temple you need these, it's called kli sharis, these special holy vessels. So once I have established that I need to do the libations on private altars, and private altars don't need vessels, what I'm really saying is that even if I'm going to do a sacrifice, and I'm not going to have the right vessels for the libations, it's still going to be good. Why? Because since on a private altar, when it was permitted, I was able to use vessels that weren't special vessels. So once it was like grandfathered in, sort of, that there is such a case where it does work, so then I'll be guilty if I use a regular vessel for a libation outside the temple, and you're not going to be able to tell me, but you didn't put it in the right vessel, it's not considered valid. I'm going to say, no, it is valid, because on private altars, when they were permissible, I did not need a special vessel, and I still needed to do the libation. That means that the special vessel is not significant enough to invalidate it, that I should not be guilty if I did it in the wrong place outside the temple. However, according to Rabbi Elazar, he says that in the desert they did not bring the libations. So what does it mean when you'll come into the land? You start to bring the libations. Where? Only on the main altar. But on the private altars, there's never libations. So according to Rabbi Elazar, there's never a case where libations, the pouring of the wine, there's never a case where they do not require a vessel, because there was never a command to bring them on private altars. The only command was to bring them on the public altar. Public altar requires the vessel. So therefore, if you don't put it in the right vessel, according to Rabbi Elazar, you're not going to be guilty. Why? Because that's an invalidation. Because we never find any situation where you can use a non-sanctified vessel for this service. And if you do use a non-sanctified vessel, then it's invalid. So therefore, if you do an invalid sacrifice outside the temple, it's invalid. It's not guilty. Okay. It's an interesting little explanation here. It's only 3 words in the Gemara, and it's like this huge explanation, but okay. Third explanation. Ravina Amar. Ravina says that the question is, are we learning the difference between the two opinions? Are we learning the water libation from the wine libation? The Tanna Kama holds that we do learn, and therefore, if the water libation is not in a holy vessel, you're still bichayev, because we find Nisach Hayayin, the pouring of the wine, on private altars. Rabbi Elazar holds that you don't learn the water from the wine, and therefore only if you pour wine you'll be chayev. But if you pour water, you won't be chayev unless it's in a holy vessel. What's the explanation for this? Explanation is, it's exactly the way we explained before. The only difference is that the water libation was never done on a private altar. Only the wine libation was done on a private altar. And so everyone holds that there was a command to bring wine on private altars when they came into the land. When you come into the land, if there's no temple or no tabernacle, yeah, and you bring a sacrifice, you have to bring the wine together with the sacrifice. What type of vessel are you going to use if it's a private altar? You use a regular vessel. Aha! If you can use a regular vessel, that means that if you bring a sacrifice when the temple is around, outside the temple where there's guilt there, you're not allowed to do that. And you don't have a proper vessel, you're still going to be guilty. Why? Because we find pouring wine without a special vessel on private altars. So, but what about water libations? When you pour the water on sukkahs, so water was never on a private altar. Water was only on public altars. So if you pour water on sukkahs outside the temple without a special vessel, one opinion is, the sages, that you're not guilty. The sages would hold that you are guilty, because even though you didn't use a special utensil, but we learn from the wine that you don't need a special utensil to the water. However, Rebbe Lazar holds that outside the temple, water never existed. And therefore, the only case that you can be obligated here is if you use a holy vessel. And you didn't use a holy vessel. And so therefore, it's invalid. So therefore, it's not considered a sacrifice. But by the wine, it is a sacrifice even in an unholy vessel. Yeah, but we don't learn one from the other. The water is not, there's no guilt there. Tanur Rabbanan. The rabbis taught, Hamanasich shleishes lugin yayin b'chutz chayiv. Someone that pours 3 lug of wine outside the temple is guilty. Rabbi Lazar bar Shimon Aimer v'hu kitchen b'keli. That's only if they were put into a vessel. It sounds very similar to what we were saying, but it's a little bit clearer. A similar brisa. Now the Gemara asks, "My binayu, what is the practical difference between the two opinions?" Amar Avada bar Rav Yitzchak birutzei midei sika binayu. You know, when you fill up a utensil, so there's it's called the meniscus. When you fill it up and it goes over the top, because of the surface tension, it holds it in place. It doesn't just spill over. So it creates this meniscus, this curvature on the top. So that when you have that on the top of the vessel, do we say that is also sanctified by the vessel, or do we say only what's in the vessel? So the Tanna Kama holds that what's on the top, what's above the vessel, that's being held down by the surface tension, is also holy, and therefore if you pour wine together with what's on the top, you're chayav. However, according to Rebbe Lazar, what's above the vessel is not considered holy, and the person's only will be guilty if he pours the 3 lugim that's in the vessel without what's on top. What's unclear to me is he pouring what's inside also? So why isn't he guilty just from what's inside? I understand he's not guilty for the part that's on top, but it sounded like he was pouring 3 lugin. You don't have 3 lugin on top, you have 3 lugin inside plus what's on top. I don't know. Oh, that's what it is. You need to pour 3 lugin. He's getting the 3 lugin because together with the measurement, his measurement of 3 lugin is containing also what's on top. And if you don't count what's on top of the vessel, then he doesn't have a complete 3 lugin. That's the machlokes. So to get to 3 lug, you need to use the what's on top as well. And because Rabbi Lazar doesn't hold that you can use what's on top, so therefore he doesn't have a complete measurement. Okay, Rava Braid the Rava Amar. He has a different interpretation of what's the difference between the sages and Rabbi Lazar. He says, it's actually Rabbi Lazar Bar Shimon here. He says that the machlekes is exactly the way we explained before, which has to do with kirvu nesachim b'bama kebenayu. Did they bring nesachim on a bama? Did they bring the libations, or the other version here is, did they bring the libations in the desert? We mentioned before. Did you look at this piece? That if they brought libations in the desert, then when the pasuk says when you'll come into the land, you should bring the libations, that's referring to the private altars. You should bring libations. If they bring libations on the private altars, that teaches me that you don't need the holy vessels to bring libations. And therefore, if you bring libations outside the temple without holy vessels, you'll still be guilty, because we find that that's a valid sacrifice. However, if we say that they did not bring the libations outside the temple, they did not bring the libations in the desert, then when the Torah says you should bring libations in when you come into the land, that means that you only bring it on the main altars, not on the private altars. That means we never have a scenario where you can bring libations without special vessels. That means that if you bring libations without special vessels, it's already invalid, and you're not guilty outside the temple. That's a machlekes with the following Tanaim. The Tanya was taught in a brisa. Bamas yachid ein tzricha nesachim. Divrei Rebbe. A private altar does not need libations. That means you bring a sacrifice, you don't have to bring the wine and the oil that comes along with it on a private altar. This was only during the time that you were allowed to bring on the private altar, just a few years. V'chachamim maimrim te'unim nesachim. The sages say that it does require nesachim. What would be the difference? Why are they arguing about this? V'hani tanai kahani tanai. And these tanaim follow the following tanaim, which is the Tanya was taught in the brisa. Ki savayu, when you will come into the land, and the pasuk goes on to say that you were obligated to bring for every sacrifice the libations that come along with it, which each animal has a different amount. The first opinion here says that what's the pasuk telling me? That on the large altars, the main public altars, you need to bring nesachim together with the sacrifices. You say that you need to bring on a big altar. Maybe it's referring to even private altars. When the pasuk goes on and says, when you'll come into the land of your inheritances, asher ni noisin lachem, that I'm giving to you, it must be talking about the general altar that's made for everyone. Because we're learning from the lachem here. That's what they say. Because it has a plural you. Asher ni noisin lachem, that I'm giving to the plural you, to the general public. So that's referring to the Bama Gedola, the big Bama, that's a communal. So the Rabbi Shmuel, these are the words of Rabbi Shmuel, that says that you have to bring libations on the public altars, only when they come into the land. Rabbi Kiva Aimer Ki Savayu, when it says when you will come, Latina Nesachim Bebama Ketana. It's coming to tell us that we need Nesachim even on private altars, the libations. Hakasim Medaber. That's what the verse is referring to. You say that it's referring to the private altars. Or maybe it's referring to the large altars, the public altars. When it says to the land of your inheritances, it's talking about the Bama that's in all the inheritances. Okay. Which is the Bamas Yachid, which is all over the place, in all private places, backyard altars. So, Kishetim Tzeloimar, if you'll find to say, L'div Rabbi Yishmael, Lo Yikarvu Nesachim Bamidbar. According to Rabbi Yishmael, they did not bring the Nesachim in the desert. That's why the libations in the desert. That's why when it comes into the land, the Torah says you'll start to bring them. Rabbi Akiva karvu nesachim bamidbar. According to Rabbi Akiva, they did bring it in the desert. That's why when it comes into land, it says that they have to bring it on private altars as well. Okay. There's big discussions amongst the sages whenever the verse says when you will come into the land. What it's referring to. What's it trying to say coming to the land? That means he didn't do it before. It doesn't mean immediately, before the 14 years. It doesn't mean that it's only applicable in the land of Israel, but not outside the land of Israel. It comes into huge machlekes in halacha, this, just those words. The term for the machlekes about chadash and yashan is based on when you'll come into the land. Does it only apply in the land of Israel? Does it apply outside the land of Israel? It doesn't mean only from the time that you'll come in. Beforehand there was no problem. But it really applies in all places because it's a vague term. It doesn't. Right. When you will come into the land, what does that mean? In the land, it doesn't mean from the time or. Okay. So here, the when you will come into the land is based on what was going on beforehand, because something's changing, but the history would change what the law would be. Nechemia Omer, Shiori Adam Shekivim B'chutz is Chayiv. Nechemia in the Mishnah said that if you bring the remnants of the blood outside the temple, then the person's guilty, because the remnants is also considered a type of sacrifice. Rabbi Yechanan says, as you read the word Tana here, I think so. Tana, Reb Nechemia Kedivri Ha'omer. Reb Nechemia goes according to the opinion that Shirayim Ma'akvin, that the remnants of the blood affect the validity of the sacrifice. That's why if you bring them outside, it's such a significant offering that would make the person guilty. Meisvei, I'll ask a question. Reb Nechemia Omer Shiarei Adam Shakrim B'chutz Chayev. Reb Nechemia says that the Shiarei Adam that was brought outside is Chayev. Amalei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says to him, I think Rabbi Akiva is older than Reb Nechemia. Is probably like teacher status. Balei Shiarei Adam Shiarei Mitzvaheim. Why are you saying that the person's guilty if he brings him outside? It's not an obligation. It's only like it's something that you're supposed to do, but it's not compulsory, and therefore you shouldn't be guilty with bringing him outside because it's not a real sacrifice. I can prove it to you that that's not an issue, because the fats in the organs that were not burnt, you're supposed to put them back on the altar, but it's not compulsory either. But if you do bring them outside the temple and you burn them outside the temple, the person would be guilty for offering out a sacrifice outside the temple, even though it's not compulsory. Those are not compulsory, and if they're brought outside, the person's guilty. You can't compare. That's the main part of the sacrifice, or that's the beginning of the sacrifice, the fats in the organs that they get burnt on. This is just the remnants that's left over at the end. Now if we accept the view of Rabbi Yechanan, that he either quoting a brisa or it's his own opinion depending on the version of the text, that says that Reb Nechemia holds that the remnants of the blood invalidates the sacrifice if it's not poured, if it's ma'akiv. That's what Reb Yechanan says. If Reb Nechemia holds of that opinion, Leimalei, then Rabbi Nechemia has a response. Haninami makvi. Why doesn't he just say that? What are you talking about? The remnants of the blood invalidates the sacrifice if it's not poured. This is a real sacrifice. In other words, Rabbi Kiva says it's not compulsory. You should say back, yes, it is. Must be the fact that he didn't respond that was because he doesn't hold of that. He had to come up with these other little logics that maybe even though it's not compulsory, it still should be. So tiyufta, this is a strong question. However, now that Ravada Barava explained Machlokes b'shirayim hapnimim av b'shirayim hachitzonim divrei hakol le'ma'akvei. Where's the machlokes about the remnants of the blood, referring to sacrifices that are brought inside the sanctuary, special sacrifices? Where over there it says that if they're not poured on the base of the altar, the sacrifice is invalid. These are very strict sacrifices that every single detail invalidates. If it's not done correctly, would invalidate the sacrifice. If that's the case, Reb Nechemia, Kikam Reb Nechemia b'shirayim apnimim. When does Reb Nechemia say that if you take the blood outside the temple and you pour it out the remnants of the blood outside the temple, that's referring to those special sacrifices that if you don't pour it in the right place, or if you don't pour that blood, the sacrifice becomes invalid. That's what Reb Nechemia says, that if you pour it outside the temple, the person is guilty. Kitanyahi, but where's the brisa that Rabbi Yochanan quoted? Where's the brisa that not that Rabbi Yochanan quoted from the question, where there's a discussion between Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Akiva, where Rabbi Akiva says, but it doesn't invalidate the sacrifice. That's b'shirayim achitzainim. That's talking about the remnants of the blood from the regular sacrifices. With the regular sacrifices, it's not ma'akiv. It doesn't invalidate the sacrifice if the blood isn't brought. And therefore, Rabbi Nechemia needs to come on to these other types of logic that maybe even though it's not compulsory, but nevertheless still it would invalidate it. Okay, now this piece of the Gemara, this last piece is in parentheses, but apparently Rashi has some of it. The Gemara now says, Rabbi Kiva lo yada Maika Amar Rab Nechemia. Rabbi Kiva did not understand what Rab Nechemia's opinion was. Who savar Rab Nechemia b'shirayim chitzonim Amar. He thought that Rab Nechemia was referring to the outer sacrifices, and therefore he told him. He asked him, but it's not compulsory. But kamahadalem shirayim chitzonim, and that's why he was asking him about the shirayim chitzonim. Rab Nechemia, the dvarv Rabbi Akiva come, and Rab Nechemia was answering him back based on Rabbi Akiva's logic. It was very strange because he could have corrected him. He's answering him back that you think I'm talking about that. He was just playing along. He could have said that I'm not referring to that. I'm only referring to half of what you're talking about, and therefore your question. But anyway, maybe that's why they take it out. Maybe it means that's Rabbi Akiva, even on Shirayim HaPrimim, even from the inner sacrifice, didn't hold that it's ma'akiv. Maybe that's how, that would make more sense. Okay, let's see the new Mishnah. Hamelech Asoif. Gotta follow this carefully because the Gemara is going to really dig into these little laws here. If someone that does malika on a bird, which that's the way it's meant to be done, with the fingernail, malika. In Chassidus, Amalek is associated with malika.
Really?
That's the same sound, just with extra ayin. It has to do with Amalek attacks the connection between the mind and the heart. So it doesn't affect the mind, it doesn't affect the heart, it affects the connection, which is the back of the neck. That's the connection. So whenever there's transition, there's always like an imbalance for that's where like in the chemistry with the valence electrons, as they're becoming stable, but right before it's stable, that's supposed to be the most
Stable.
Yeah, the most unstable. So it's always in the transition periods. Okay, so hamaylik as bifnim. If malika is done on a bird, which is correct, inside the temple, which is also correct, that's where it's supposed to be. However, vehela bachutz, he then takes the bird outside. He's chayev. Takes the bird outside, and hela also means he offers it outside. He offers it on an altar outside the temple. He's guilty for bringing a sacrifice outside the temple. We'll go further. You'll see why this is significant. Molak bachutz. But let's say he did the malika with his fingernail on the bird outside the temple. Vehela bachutz. And then he brings it up on the altar outside the temple. Then he's pater, he's exempt. Why? Because the beginning of the sacrifice was done incorrectly. You can't do malika outside the temple. Outside the temple, there's no such thing as a sacrifice outside the temple for malika to be done, and it's considered that you just killed a bird like with a stone, or because the only place where malika should be done is in the temple. So you already invalidated it before you even brought it up on the altar. Okay, so this you're exempt. You're exempt because it was invalid. This is exactly the opposite. Inside the temple, you're not supposed to do shchita on a bird. You're supposed to do malika on the bird.
Outside. Inside.
Inside, you're not supposed to do shchita. Inside, you're supposed to do malika. But what happened here was he does shchita inside the temple, which was wrong. Behela bachutz, and he brings it outside the temple, which is wrong. But that's the sin that we're discussing. And he brings it out on an altar, so he's pater. Why? Because it was invalid already inside the temple. Even though if it would have been done outside the temple, that would have been the correct non-kosher way of doing it. Shachat bachutz vehela bachutz. If he slaughters it outside and he brings it up outside the temple, so he's chayev on both. He's chayev on the shechita, he's chayev on bringing it up. Actually, there was machlokes about that, but Rabbi Yehuda had an opinion that says no, it needs to be from inside that, right? Okay. Nimtza derech hechsherei bifnim. What comes out is that the way that a bird would be kosher in the temple, which means malika, peturei bachutz. If he does malika outside, he's exempt.